Warning! This video is not suitable for young children, even though it is a Moomin-themed story. Reckless Brothers Finland proudly presents the Groke News Story. Chapter 1. I was at the Moomin house, sitting on the living room sofa, drinking the hot coffee that Moomin Mama had just made for us. The coffee tasted strong, but good. I watched Moomin Papa squint intently at the newspaper. Snufkin was sitting next to me on the sofa, slurping his coffee while looking absent-minded. Moomin Mama had returned to her chores. It was a normal day in Moominvalley. At least until two tiny guests arrived at the house, who were behaving very suspiciously. They had introduced themselves as Thingamy and Bob, and after enjoying dinner with us, they merely thanked and locked themselves in the upstairs guest room. They were still hiding there. Moomin Papa had been especially cautious around the newcomers, whereas Moomin Troll had been trying to get them to come play with him. Those two were nonetheless rather antisocial, and they also seemed rather timid and didn't want to come along. I drank the rest of my coffee and wondered why those strangers had come to stay at the Moomin house in the first place if they were mostly going to stay in their room and only come out to eat. I got up from the sofa and took my cup to the kitchen, where Moomin Mama gave me her sweet smile and continued with the huge pile of dishes. The sky started becoming dimmer, and I noticed that the clock was already nearing 8. I had been entirely focused on the newspaper, which I had started reading after Moomin Papa was finished reading it. I noticed that the house was full of life once again after Moomin Troll and Sniff had returned to the Moomin house. Little Mai and Snork Maiden, on the other hand, had gone to their homes, so Moomin Mama had unknowingly made a bigger batch of rice pudding than usual. I gratefully took a serving and ate with a good appetite. At the table, in addition to me, were Moomin Troll, Sniff, Moomin Papa, and Snufkin, while Moomin Mama was cleaning the kitchen stove. The guests hadn't been heard from at all in a while, until I heard running in the staircase. Thingamy and Bob came to us looking panic-stricken, which Moomin Papa also noticed. They only ate a little of the rice pudding that Moomin Mama offered, and were about to return upstairs immediately after, until Moomin Papa stopped them and asked why they were so nervous and spent most of their time by themselves. One of the guests, Thingamy, looked questioningly at their friend Bob, swallowed, and started an explanation that didn't make any sense, but its contents were so frightening that it forcefully alarmed me. Thingamy told us that they were being followed by some big, hill-shaped thing that always appeared when they were about to go to sleep. They called this creature the Groke, and their explanation of her was so confusing and distressing that I couldn't understand it quite fully. They said that the thing always seemed to appear behind them and that she would kill anyone who looked into her eyes. They explained that their mother had talked about the Groke a couple days before her death, after which the creature had started appearing near them as well. And because of this, they had left their house and fled elsewhere in the hopes that the monster would not follow them. But now they were sure that the Groke would come to them tonight as well. Moomin Papa tried to ask more about this Groke, but the answers were quite strange and confusing. Thus, he looked like he thought the guests were insane and whispered something into Moomin Mama's ear. Moomin Troll and Snufkin also clearly did not believe what they had heard. Sniff was the only one besides me who seemed really upset. Although he kept repeating that the guests were lying in order to scare us and that there are no such things as Grokes, I could see the fear shining in his eyes. Though I was also a little terrified by what the guests had told us, I still aimed to think logically. And finally, I said that the guests were likely paranoid or perhaps otherwise psychotic. My theory got strengthened when the guests proceeded to hand out pills. Bob handed everyone a pill and said that they would help us fall asleep. Moomin Papa and Moomin Mama were shocked, immediately grabbed the pills from the table and threw them in the oven. They also seized the duo's 3 pill bottles and threw them into the fire as well. After this, the guests went completely berserk and started yelling things like, "We can never sleep again," and "You killed us all." And then Moomin Papa signaled me, Moomin Troll, and Snufkin to help. We gagged and tied them up into chairs since we couldn't take that mad screaming and hysteria anymore. Moomin Papa decided that the next day we would report those 2 to the police and suspected them to be either insane or drug addicts. Moomin Mama was upset by the situation and went to make evening tea. Snufkin prepared to leave for his tent. I looked at the clock and saw that it was already 11:30. I glanced out the window and noticed that it was pitch black. I also felt a strange loneliness and cold within me, so I gladly proceeded to enjoy Moomin Mama's warm tea, and its warmth made me feel a bit better. Snufkin wished us good night and stepped outside, and I watched his outline slowly fade into the night. Sniff, like I, also decided to stay the night at the house. So Moomin Mama went upstairs and changed the bedsheets in Thingamy and Bob's room on the bed on which Sniff got to sleep. I myself had already slept one night in another guest room that was also upstairs. Moomin Papa and Moomin Mama slowly retreated into their own bedroom, and Thingamy and Bob were inhospitably left tied into the chairs in the living room, where we nonetheless lit a candle to bring some light. Moomin Troll looked at the mysterious duo, looking a little frustrated, and for a moment, he looked just like his father. I wondered what was going on in his head right now, so I asked what he thought about Thingamy and Bob, and most importantly, the Groke. Moomin Troll wondered if a logical person like me could believe in fantasy creatures, and stated that he was sure those 2 had abused drugs so much that they had permanently damaged their noggins and were now seeing Grokes everywhere. I said that I somewhat agreed with him, wished him good night, and watched Moomin Troll also get in his room and close the door. Then I marched into my guest room, blew out the candle providing light, and laid down. There aren't any Grokes, I thought, and closed my eyes. Silence filled the house. I remember waking up to a terrible coldness at some point. I pulled the blanket tighter around me and tried to fall asleep again. However, the blanket didn't help at all because the cold reached my bones and guts. I changed my position and my heart skipped a beat when I noticed the door to my room was ajar. I was fully sure that I had closed it as I was going to sleep. Wild thoughts filled my mind, but I still got up to close the door. I thought that I had just forgotten to lock the door and was going to go back to bed until the silence was broken by a noise that made my blood freeze. I can't possibly describe that noise because it sounded so low, croaky, and inhuman that the human ear shouldn't even be able to comprehend such sounds. It sounded moaning and threatening at the same time. I couldn't make out words, but the noise filled me with a kind of fear I had never felt before. It sounded like it was coming from downstairs, so I closed the door and immediately rushed toward my bed. However, I didn't notice my blanket laying on the floor, which I tripped over, and in that instant, my world darkened. To be continued in the next chapter.